Chapter 85, Colleagues 2. Some were on the road and some were on the surrounding buildings, seemingly searching. On their doused robes, there was a badge with a blood-colored constable character on it. This scene caused Xu Qing to squint his eyes. He could sense the spirit energy fluctuations from these 7 blood-eyed disciples, and many of them were filled with baleful auras. The homicide department, Xu Qing guessed. At that moment, some of these 7 blood-eyes cultivators discovered Xu Qing, who was in the corner. Even though he did very well, there were many of them, and they were filled with vigilance. Hence, he couldn't avoid them. Among them, there was a youth with phoenix eyes. After he coldly glanced at Xu Qing, he quickly walked over. As the other party got closer, a wave of fiendish intent gushed over. Xu Qing's body instantly tensed up. He could sense an incomparably intense sense of danger from the other party. Before the other party arrived, his aura had already permeated the surroundings like a cold wind. Only those who had killed a lot of people would possess such killing intent. Xu Qing narrowed his eyes. He knew that if he were to flee now, under the influence of his aura, the other party would definitely attack. Hence, he stood there and didn't retreat. Instead, he looked at the other party. At the same time, his right hand landed on the leather bag containing the black iron stick, ready to be taken out at any moment. Identity token. After the youth arrived, he sized up Xu Qing and his gaze landed on his right hand. Many of the disciples at the side also moved closer, surrounding Xu Qing from all directions. Their expressions were ice cold, as though they would immediately act if Xu Qing showed the slightest hint of abnormality. Xu Qing noticed the gaze of the other party and became even more determined to change his habit. At that moment, he swept his gaze across the surroundings and cautiously took out his identity token before passing it over. The youth took it and looked at it. The coldness on his face faded a little, and he felt a little surprised. He then smiled at his companion beside him. "I actually met a newbie who is supposed to report to our 7th Peaks Homicide Department. All right, everyone, restrain yourselves. Don't let the little kid be scared to the point that he doesn't dare to report back even though he wasn't killed by the murderer." As his voice rang out, most of the auras in the surroundings retracted. However, there were still a few who locked on to Xu Qing. As expected of the homicide department, Xu Qing felt that the locked-on aura on his body was reduced by more than half. As for the youth with phoenix eyes, he returned the token to Xu Qing and sized him up. "Kid, you're a little interesting. Hurry up and leave. The city is very dangerous tonight." When Xu Qing heard this, he nodded and took back his identity token. Just as he was about to leave, at that moment, in the distant night, a mournful cry pierced through the air. This voice was sharp and echoed with roars. Xu Qing's expression turned serious and he immediately turned his head. He instantly saw a black shadow spewing out blood as it sped through the air on top of a building in the distance. Although the spirit energy fluctuations on his body were a little chaotic, his foundation-building aura caused Xu Qing's heart to tremble. Behind him was a middle-aged man in a purple Taoist robe. He had a dignified expression and an imposing aura. Even though the spirit energy fluctuations were far away, they still rose like flames and were even more powerful. As the sky whistled closer, the purple-robed middle-aged man directly raised his hand. A spear suddenly appeared in his hand, and he ruthlessly threw it forward. The voice seemed to have exploded, creating a huge shockwave that spread out in all directions. The spear seemed to burn from the friction and transformed into a fire dragon that charged straight for the fleeing black shadow. From afar, it looked like the sky was about to be torn apart, causing the fire dragon's light to be dazzling and extremely gorgeous. Its speed was so fast that it instantly tore through the air. Under the even sharper whistling sound, it penetrated the black shadow's chest like a hot knife through butter. With a bang, its body was nailed to the green bricks on the street. The impact it caused was like a storm that swept in all directions. It was clean and efficient. This scene caused Xu Qing's mind to tremble intensely. From what Xu Qing felt, the black shadow killed by the other party was similar to the diamond sex ancestor. As for the purple-robed middle-aged man's spear, it was incomparably powerful. He felt that if he were to encounter it, he wouldn't have the slightest chance to dodge it and would die. "It's the director. Let's go." At that moment, the expressions of those disciples from the homicide department beside him were filled with excitement. They no longer bothered Xu Qing and instead, they all charged toward the battlefield at full speed. Even after they had walked far away, The shock in Xu Qing's heart as well as the graceful bearing of that spear still filled his mind. After a long while, he drew in a deep breath, and his gaze revealed a hint of desire. "I wonder when he'll be able to do the same," Xu Qing mumbled. He cast a deep glance in the direction the purple-robed middle-aged man had disappeared in before turning and walking away quickly. He sensed that the night wasn't peaceful. At that moment, he sped up. After an hour, he finally found Port 79. The harbor was different from the inside of the city. The light here was even dimmer. Although guards were patrolling and although they were vigilant, when they saw pedestrians, they would choose to avoid them. Clearly, their vigilance wasn't for order but to prevent themselves from being harmed. After seeing Xu Qing, they acted the same way. After taking a glance, they didn't ask any questions and immediately walked far away. Xu Qing warily looked at the patrolling cultivators who had walked far away and fell silent. He now had a better understanding of the dangers of the seven blood eyes. At that moment, he slowly approached the harbor. Here, the humidity of the sea breeze was even clearer. As the sound of waves rose and fell, one could see the 79th harbor forming the shape of a horse's hoof. The seawater was swaying within, constantly hitting the shore. The boats inside were mostly separated by a certain distance, as though they were on guard against each other. Their sizes were about the same but their shapes were slightly different. However, upon closer inspection, the basic appearance of the boats was that of the small boats in Xu Qing's bottle. There were over 200 of them. However, this 79th bay was too big. The number of ships docked here took up less than 20% of the space. Although there were some lights inside, it was very quiet. There was no sign of any disciples heading out either. To everyone, the descent of night was the highest peak of vigilance. At the same time, Xu Qing also discovered that the spirit energy here was very dense, and so were the anomalous substances. They seemed to be emanating from the sea. The pitch-black seawater blocked one's vision, making it impossible to see what was at the bottom of the sea. This unknownness made one feel uneasy. At the same time, the bottom of the sea seemed to be hiding a great danger. Xu Qing only took a glance and felt all the hairs on his body standing up. It felt like a forbidden zone. If I cultivate here, my improvement will be very fast. Also, I'll be tempering myself at all times, Xu Qing mumbled and quickly walked a few steps to find the Zhuan-No.33. The location was a little remote and the surroundings were empty. There weren't many boats there. At this point, Xu Qing cautiously observed his surroundings. After confirming that there was nothing wrong, he took out a small bottle from the brocade box and opened it. A light flashed within the small bottle and the small boat inside flew out. When it landed on the water surface, it automatically enlarged. After the boat landed on the sea with a bang and created waves of ripples. What appeared before Xu Qing was a boat that was 10 feet wide and 30 feet long. Its entire body was pitch black and a large number of runes were carved on every plank. As it emitted a dark glow, it also emitted spirit energy fluctuations. It was very extraordinary. The black tent seemed to be made from the skin of some mutated beast. Its scales were clear and looked very sturdy. There was also a statue at the bow of the boat. This statue had the head of a gigantic crocodile. It opened its ghastly mouth and revealed sharp teeth. Amidst its ferocity, there was intense cruelty. From afar, this small boat looked like a giant crocodile floating on the sea.